From New York, this is Democracy Now!
We want justice!
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 Justice for the victims!
We want justice!
Justice for Nigeria!
We want justice!
For all the killings!
We want justice!
Mass protests against police brutality are continuing in Nigeria after security forces shot and killed at least 12 peaceful protesters in Lagos Tuesday. We'll go to Nigeria for the latest. Then, as fighting continues in the South Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we look at the conflict, which has already killed over 700 people.
To put an end to the war or to reach a ceasefire, the influence of Turkey on this conflict has to be brought under control by the major powers, that is Russia and also the US.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The confirmed U.S. death toll from COVID-19 has topped 222,000 as a new report by Columbia University researchers blasted the Trump administration over its disastrous handling of the pandemic. The report's authors write, "We estimate at least 130,000 deaths and perhaps as many as 210,000 could have been avoided with earlier policy interventions and more robust federal coordination and leadership. Even with the dramatic recent appearance of new COVID-19 waves globally, the abject failures of U.S. government policies and crisis messaging persist," unquote. The report came as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warned the U.S. is heading into the most dangerous phase of the pandemic yet, with cold weather and holidays driving people to congregate indoors, where the virus spreads much more easily. CDC Deputy Director Jay Butler spoke at a rare news conference at the agency's Atlanta headquarters.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a distressing trend here in the United States with COVID-19 cases increasing in nearly 75% of the country.
On Wednesday, the CDC changed its definition of a close contact with an infectious person to include brief interactions totaling 15 minutes or more within 6 feet of someone over a one-day period. The recommendation will expand the number of people who should go into quarantine, according to the CDC. A California appeals court has ordered prison authorities to cut the population of the overcrowded San Quentin State Prison in half, following a massive coronavirus outbreak that killed 28 prisoners and infected 2,200, about 3/4 of the prison population. In the ruling, the court cited the state's, quote, deliberate indifference to the plight of prisoners during the pandemic. Prison authorities are weighing whether to appeal the ruling, which would force the transfer or parole of about 1,100 people held at San Quentin. In related news, the American Civil Liberties Union has sued 3 federal agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Prisons, for documents related to what the ACLU called the federal government's, quote, failed response to the spread of COVID-19 in prisons and jails. Donald Trump and Joe Biden face off this evening in Nashville, Tennessee, for their second and final debate. The Commission on Presidential Debates say it will mute the microphones of both candidates during parts of tonight's 90-minute program after President Trump interrupted Biden at least 128 times during their first debate. The debate will also feature plexiglass barriers separating the candidates after Trump held the last debate while he was likely infected with coronavirus. On Wednesday, former President Barack Obama headlined a drive-in rally for Biden in Philadelphia, where he blasted Trump for failing as president.
I did hope, for the sake of the country, that he might show some interest in taking the job seriously. But it hasn't happened. He hasn't shown any interest in doing the work or helping anybody but himself and his friends, or treating the presidency like a reality show that he can use to get attention.
On Wednesday, President Trump spoke to an estimated 15,000 people at a campaign rally in Gastonia, North Carolina, where few wore masks and no one practiced social distancing. The rally came amidst a surge of COVID-19 cases in North Carolina, where hospitalizations rapidly approaching a previous record high set in July. Democracy Now! Will air tonight's presidential debate uninterrupted for 90 minutes at democracynow.org, beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The New York Times reports President Trump has secretly maintained a bank account in China for years, even as he bashed Joe Biden for being weak on China. The Times reveals Trump paid nearly $200,000 in taxes to China while pursuing licensing deals there between 2013 and 2015. Around the same time, Trump paid little or no U.S. income tax. In other election news, Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe accused Russia and Iran of taking actions to interfere in the U.S. election in a hastily arranged evening press briefing where no questions were allowed. FBI Director Christopher Wray, who President Trump is reportedly considering firing, also spoke. Ratcliffe claimed Russia and Iran had obtained some voter registration information which is often available publicly.
This data can be used by foreign actors to attempt to communicate false information to registered voters that they hope will cause confusion, sow chaos, and undermine your confidence in American democracy. To that end, we have already seen Iran sending spoofed emails designed to intimidate voters, incite social unrest, and damage President Trump.
While Ratcliffe claimed Iran was trying to damage Trump, he offered no details backing up the claim. The one example he cited appeared to show intimidation of Democratic voters. Ratcliffe accused Iran of sending threatening fake emails to some Democrats that were designed to look as if they were sent by the far-right Proud Boys. Iran called the charges baseless and absurd and denied being behind the emails. Intelligence sources told Reuters it's still unclear who sent them. Democrats on the Homeland Security Committee questioned the allegations. The committee initially tweeted, quote, "Do not listen to Ratcliffe, partisan hack," unquote. That tweet was later deleted. The committee also tweeted, quote, "To clarify, these election interference operations are clearly not meant to harm President Trump." The Senate Judiciary Committee is set to vote today on Judge Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Democrats are boycotting the proceedings, which they say will deny the committee its required quorum. They're planning to fill their empty seats with photos of people impacted by the Affordable Care Act. Republican Committee Chair Lindsey Graham says he'll hold a vote anyway, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has promised a full Senate vote on Barrett's confirmation on Monday. If confirmed, Barrett would likely rule on the fate of the Affordable Care Act and could help settle any potential challenge to November's election results before the Supreme Court. Purdue Pharma has agreed to an $8 billion settlement with the Justice Department over its illegal marketing of the powerful opioid OxyContin. Under the deal, the Purdue Corporation will plead guilty to 3 criminal counts, but no one, not even members of the billionaire Sackler family who own Purdue, will face any jail time. Purdue Pharma is in bankruptcy proceedings, making it likely the company will pay just a fraction of the $8 billion settlement. As opioid abuse surged across the United States, drug overdoses became the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 50, with more than 67,000 such deaths in 2018 alone. In a statement, the advocacy group Payne Stackler wrote, quote, "This proves that there are 2 justice systems in America, one for billionaires and one for the rest of us. The Sacklers walking away from Purdue is a retirement, not a punishment," they wrote. In a shift for the Catholic Church, Pope Francis has endorsed civil unions for same-sex couples. In a new documentary, Pope Francis says, quote, "Homosexuals have a right to be a part of the family. They're children of God and have a right to a family. What we have to create is a civil union law," he said. In the film, Pope Francis also criticizes the Trump administration's family separation policy at the border, saying, quote, "It's cruelty, and separating kids from parents goes against natural rights," the Pope said. In Mexico, protesters marched near the U.S. border in Tijuana Wednesday, demanding the Trump administration end its Remain in Mexico policy for people seeking asylum in the United States. Immigration activist Paulina Olvera says the policy has been especially cruel for asylum seekers during the pandemic.
Because many of them have spent months here, some even a year waiting. And since the pandemic, the border has been closed completely to asylum seekers, and they're in legal limbo. They don't know when they're going to have their next hearing. They have no protection from Mexico and the United States, and I believe many of them are struggling even to just eat. It affects everything, including mental health.
In Colombia, thousands of trade unionists, teachers, and students joined an indigenous-led national strike Wednesday, demanding an end to the killings of social movement leaders and to police violence. Colombia's right-wing president, Ivan Duque, has refused protesters' demands that he meet publicly with protest leaders, saying without evidence they've been infiltrated by terrorists. This is protester Harold Arias.
We're scared of going back to our territories without getting a dialogue with the president because there is the uncertainty that indigenous leaders are being murdered by a national government that does not want to respect our rights.
In Tulsa, Oklahoma, archaeologists have found a mass grave containing at least 10 coffins during a search for victims of one of the worst massacres of African Americans in U.S. history. In June 1921, a white mob burned to the ground Tulsa's affluent African American neighborhood of Greenwood, known as Black Wall Street, killing at least 300 black residents. Investigators have not confirmed if the bodies found in the unmarked grave are victims of the massacre. And here in New York, a federal judge has announced he'll decide without hearing oral arguments whether President Trump can be privately sued for defamation for comments he made as president against E. Jean Carroll, who accused Trump of raping her in the 1990s. The Justice Department wants to crush the case by switching the defendant from Trump to the United States government, arguing Trump's denial of a rape accusation was done in his official capacity as president. Oral arguments were scheduled for Wednesday, but the Justice Department's lawyer, who traveled from Virginia, was denied entry to the New York courtroom due to the state's quarantine rules. The Justice Department then opted not to do oral arguments by phone. Jean Carroll criticized the government's handling of the case.
It was a stunning and shocking day. A woman who makes a complaint against a powerful man. Women in this country must be assured that her case will not be tossed off to the DOJ.
Again, that's Jean Carroll, who's accused Donald Trump of rape. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman here in New York, joined remotely by my co-host Nermeen Sheikh. Hi, Nermeen.
Good morning, Amy, and welcome to our listeners across the country and around the world.
Well, a warning to our listeners and viewers. We turn now to a story that includes graphic video and accounts of state violence. We begin today's show in Nigeria, where there's growing evidence to confirm security forces fired without warning on peaceful protesters Tuesday night, killing at least 12 people, as authorities imposed a curfew to clamp down on growing demonstrations against police brutality. Video shared widely on social media shows security forces in Lagos firing directly into a crowd of demonstrators who were singing Nigeria's national anthem. Issued a report Wednesday that it was Nigeria's security forces that fired on the protesters. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, issued a statement that, quote, "There is little doubt that this was a case of excessive use of force resulting in unlawful killings with live ammunition by Nigerian armed forces," she said. Amnesty International also said it received reports that shortly before the shootings, electricity was cut off for security cameras in the area where protesters had camped. At least 56 people have died during 2 2 weeks of widespread demonstrations in Nigeria, including 38 on Tuesday. The killings come 2 weeks after protests began against a branch of the Nigerian police known as SARS, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which has long been accused of committing torture, murder, and extortion. The killings have sparked outrage from Nigerians across the globe. The soccer star, Odiana Glalo, who plays for Manchester United, posted this video online.
I'm sad and heartbroken. I don't know where to start from. I'm not the kind of guy that talks about politics, but I can't keep quiet anymore for what is going on back home in Nigeria. I would say, Nigerian government, you guys are a shame to the world for killing your own citizens, sending military to the street to kill unarmed protesters because they are protesting for their rights. It's uncalled for. Today, 20th of October 2020, you people will be remembered in the history as the first government that sent military to the city to start killing their own citizens.
Well, for more, we go to Nigeria, where we're joined by two guests. In Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, we're joined by Shwari Omoile. He is a Nigerian journalist, a human rights activist, and founder and publisher of Sahara Reporters. He also ran for president in Nigeria and has been imprisoned there. In Lagos, the most populous city in Nigeria, which is the most populous country in the African continent, we're joined by Aderonke Ige, a human rights activist and lawyer who works with the organization Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. Ige has been participating in the End SARS protests. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! We're going to start in Lagos, where those fatal killings happened, the fatal shootings happened on Tuesday night. Aderonke Ige, you've been out on the streets. Describe what's happened and talk about the level of peaceful protest that has been going on against this police unit and police brutality in general.
Thank you. I cannot even begin to try to describe in words the kind of barbaric action of the Nigerian government that we saw play out on Tuesday here in Lagos. Now, these protests have been sustained, have been peaceful, have been the most, a lot of people would tend to say, oh, we don't even know the leaders, it's not, all of that. But it has been one of the most coordinated protests or demonstrations that you have ever seen without any face or any tag of leadership. That's how we have been conducting ourselves for the past 2 weeks. And you could see that there was raw passion, there was energy to just salvage the soul of our collective good, of our country, Nigeria. And a lot of young people have been at the forefront, just everybody demanding in unity and in oneness. What are we asking for? We're asking for justice. We're asking for our lives to be preserved, not to be killed arbitrarily by these officers of state called SARS, that Special Anti-Robbery Squad, but then even beyond SARS, by the Nigerian police, by the Nigerian military. It looks like everything about Nigeria is just forceful, and especially with this government, it's been totally arbitrary, has been full of impunity, and just a setup against the people. So that's all we've been asking for, and it's been totally organized, and that's what we have demonstrated. In fact, to the applause of everyone who has seen it. But then, rather than the Nigerian government taking action hidden to these demands and just being responsible, what we saw was, what a lot of us have been seeing over the years, which, good enough, is now coming to the full glare of the globe. Now, we have seen where government, rather than heed to the voices of its citizens, would rather turn against them, oppress them, and even further intimidate them for asking not to be intimidated. So what happened on Tuesday was the anticlimax of everything. So in the last 2 weeks, we've been on the street just chanting, just making our voices heard, demanding what we have been asking for as usual. But then the government, like a thief in the night, that it has always been, went out. Now, in the early evening, around 4:03 p.m., there had been messages. In fact, one of us captured some officers wearing certain uniforms, tampering with the closed-circuit camera TV, and saying there's something suspicious going on here. It was later we realized that they had actually gone to cut off the cameras. Eventually, as well, they cut off the lights. And who could have had access to the government source of light, if not government? So lights were cut off. And then what came after was the most horrendous thing ever, most horrific. And then it was just the Nigerian military. We saw men in soldiers' uniform spraying bullets, just firing live rounds at peaceful protesters who held national flags, singing the national anthem. And how did we know this eventually? We are grateful for technology. Some of us had their cameras on. Some went on. In fact, there was one of us, DJ Switch is her name, in Nigeria here. She went live on Instagram. And that was how most of us were able to also follow, because we have been protesting at different points, different grounds, running shifts, and just showing solidarity for one another and with one another. But she went on live, and we were able to follow, to monitor. Though it was dark, because of course government had cut off the light, but we were still able to make out, sounds. We saw the injured, we saw people dying right before our eyes. But then it was a situation where citizens were helpless in the face of government officials who had been sent to fire live rounds on peaceful protesters who were just there singing the national anthem. So what that told us is that, because, there was also this message that we passed across in recent, like 4 days ago, we started spreading it around, because in the course of this protest, this sustained protest, we have also seen the aggression, brutality, everything that we have been asking, demanding, campaigning against was also unleashed on us. We've seen the aggression of police, we've seen just coming at us and so on. So what we told our people was, try when you go out to go with the national flag. Ordinarily, when any military official sees the national flag or you are singing the national anthem, they are supposed to just respect that. It's a social contract, and that's everything that symbolizes us, that gives us dignity as citizens. But guess what? Everything that dignifies us was desecrated that night from what we saw live. People were dying. They were helpless. They were shouting. They were screaming. And this went on and on. So that's what happened on Tuesday. But then that was the anticlimax that happened in Lagos. So the specific location where that happened in Lagos, the protest point is at Lekki. We call it Lekki Toll Gate. So there have been other points. Like I personally have been protesting Alausa, Surulere, Orile, all of those places. And we have been doing this peacefully and sensibly and in the most applaudable manner. But then the government came, as usual, and applied force and massacred people and injured, maimed its own citizens who were there for nothing else than to ask for their lives to be saved and not to be brutalized as it has always been.
Aderonke Ige, we're going to break and then come back. We will hear more from you. Aderonke Ige is a human rights activist and a lawyer. We also will go to Nigeria's capital, Abuja, where Shwari Amoyle, the Nigerian journalist and human rights activist who's been imprisoned by the Nigerian state, has also been leading protests. Stay with us.
Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie not go unless you tell him to go. Zombie. Zombie not go stop unless you tell him to stop. Zombie. Zombie not go turn unless you tell him to turn. Zombie. Zombie not go think unless you tell him to think. Zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie not go unless you tell him to go. Zombie. Zombie not go stop unless you tell him to stop. Zombie. Zombie not go turn unless you tell him to turn. Zombie. Zombie not go think unless you tell him to think. Zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie. Tell him to go straight. Na joro jara joro. No break, no jam, no sense. Na joro jara joro. Tell him to go kill a Joe.
Zombie by the late, great, legendary Nigerian musician Fela Kuti. His son, Femi Kuti, recently marked what would have been Fela's birthday by leading an End SARS protest in Nigeria. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh as we continue to talk about what's happening in Africa's most populous country. A warning to listeners and viewers again as we report on Nigeria. The coverage includes graphic video and accounts of state violence. In Nigeria, where there's growing evidence to confirm security forces fired without warning on peaceful protesters Tuesday night, killing at least 12 people as authorities imposed a curfew to clamp down on growing demonstrations against police brutality. Some witnesses posted videos on social media where rapid gunfire could be heard. A warning, this is graphic video of state violence.
Please tell people, people are having to run. They're shooting at them at the Lekki toll gate. Please tell social media.
Well, for more, we continue in Nigeria with our two guests. In Lagos, the human rights attorney and activist Aderonke Ige, who is out in the streets. She works with the organization Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. She participated in the End SARS protests. And we now go to Abuja, Nigeria's capital, where Shwari Moile is a Nigerian journalist, human rights activist, founder and publisher of Sahara Reporters. Shwari, it is great to see you. You've been imprisoned by the Nigerian state. Now, once again, you're out on the streets. Talk about who the SARS police are, why you were protesting, and what this continued violence against the people of Nigeria means.
Thank you so much, Amy, and I'm glad to be on your show. SARS is the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. It was formed in 1992, apparently to fight armed robbery. But it was formed after the demise, not the demise, but after a unit of the Nigerian police known as the Kill and Go was kind of arrested because they were committing the same type of atrocities in those days. They were being used by oil companies to suppress villagers and protesters in the Niger Delta region. So SARS is their nephew or cousin or brother, as you can imagine, in the police force, a tactical unit that has been unleashed on young people in particular. And they have the license to do the same thing the Kill and Go do, kill, destroy, decimate, extort, invade. But they started having problems recently when they start to stop young people on the street who have dreadlocks, they have their hairs colored, and they extort them and they arrest people with phones and ask them to unlock their phones. They take them to ATMs to collect bribes and extortion fees. It was crazy, and this has been going on, and they've been killing people, young people, without warrants, without any reason, and it got to a head. But let me be very clear. SARS is just the alias name for the pent-up anger within the Nigerian society, where young people are fighting over unemployment, over lack of justice, lack of access to the national wealth, in terms of oil resources and other resources. And the fact that the democratic system in Nigeria has started to break down and yield no dividend for the people of Nigeria. So all these young people you see on the street, yes, they are fighting against police brutality, but they're also fighting against army brutality. They are fighting against unemployment. They are fighting against the incompetence and indifference of the regime that's been in power, who, by the way, sent me to prison last year for 5 months simply because I organized a protest that was supposed to take place August 5, 2019 in Lagos. And they flew me to Abuja, detained me without trial for a long time. A lot of young people are going through the same thing. You know, people are getting detained, jailed for making social media posts on Facebook, on Twitter. It's unbelievable. Nigeria has become a police state, practically. And what you're seeing is a response to all of these abuses that has been taking place. And of course, on top of that is corruption. You know, when Nigeria was under lockdown from COVID-19 between February and now, officials were making away with billions of local currency, naira, which is, millions in dollars, from things as stupid as saying that they are feeding school children who are not going to school. So people are hearing all of this, and social media is helping to amplify all of these abuses. Images are coming out, live instantaneously, and this made people to rise up at once And I tell you, I was happy to be back on the street fighting on the side of all these young people in what I call the revolution. And this is what I've always asked for, that Nigerians need to rise up against oppression and fight for their rights and have a revolution that will give them a new order and a new direction that can restore faith once again in what they call democracy here, which is just completely being managed by morons. So this is where we are, Amy. And in Abuja, where I participated, the dimension was different. They introduced what I call informal repression. In their own case in Abuja, they are not sending soldiers to kill protesters directly, but they move in urchins, and hoodlums in government vehicles to attack protesters. And they've injured, killed one protester in Abuja that we know of, and they've injured a lot of people. As of last night, these urchins being directed by the police and the Secret Service, the secret police in Nigeria, known as the DSS, are going from, they are doing house-to-house searches for people they said are leaders of this uprising that's happening in Nigeria. In my own case, yesterday, they went to court to try and revoke my bail so that I could get rearrested. But luckily for me, lawyers did a fantastic job to ward that off. So they're at war against the youth. They're at war against human rights. They're at war against the people of Nigeria. And that's what you're seeing is a very, very principled response to these abuses by Nigerians. And this has never happened before. Even during when we were fighting against the military, I've never seen such coordinated, very disciplined set of young people who have acted peacefully. And what they did in Lagos was to go after these young people, most of them middle-class young people who are there peacefully protesting. They were shooting them at close range. They're using war caliber kinds of bullets that are meant for fighting terrorists and fighting in wars against peaceful protesters at this Lekki toll gate at close range. There's never been anything like that. What made a difference this time around was social media, that this thing was captured instantaneously and broadcast to the world. Otherwise, they would have denied it. As we speak, they are still denying it. They're claiming that the casualties were false and the wounded are recovering, and they're doing all kinds of things to change the narrative, including trying to make it an ethnic and religious issue. But fail they must.
Well, Omoyele, as you pointed out, these protests are not just about police violence, but about a number of other issues. But I just want to say that a University of Leiden report in 2016 found that police violence in Nigeria is apparently among the worst in the world, if not the worst, that when police intervene in a confrontation, almost 60% of the time, the police shoot and kill someone. Could you talk about, as you said, President Buhari's government was responsible for imprisoning you last year just for organizing protests. What has his response been to these protests and the response to his decision to disband SARS?
The reason why people did not take his decision seriously is that President Buhari is tone deaf. This is who he is. This has been his character. He was a former military dictator who had carried out killings of people judicially at that time, supposedly because there's some drug carriers that were sentenced, and he brought their sentences forward and sentenced them to death. He's been part of every military regime in the country that partook in abuses of human rights up to 1983 when he took over government, and he continued it. He clamped down the press, and that's what he's doing now. Because besides just killing people, besides this whole clamp down people, they're also clamping down social media. They have laws to criminalize people who are speaking out against the government that carries death penalty. They're pushing these laws through the National Assembly, and the National Assembly has become a rubber stamp National Assembly in Nigeria. So this is not new. This is Buhari's way of doing things. Buhari doesn't believe in human rights, doesn't believe in public opinion. Buhari doesn't believe in democracy. But unfortunately, he was packaged in 2015 as a reform Democrat, and came to office, and he's just continuing with his own way of doing things. And he's surrounded by people who have the same mindset, because it suits their agenda to have a populace that cannot speak, that cannot discuss openly. And it suits the agenda that they suppress everybody so that they can continue to carry out corruption of immense proportion. So Buhari came to power saying he would fight corruption, but we discovered even more corruption in his government than even previous governments in the history of Nigeria. So this is Buhari for you. And in rejecting his ban on SARS, people are just saying, look, this is not enough. You have Inspector General of Police, they asked him to be fired, they refused. You had the Chief of Army Staff who presumably ordered these killings or shooting at Lekki. People have been asking for this man to be removed for years. They refuse to remove them because they are there to protect the despot, the Nigerian despot, Muhammadu Buhari. And unfortunately, I don't think the international community is doing enough. But hey, this is what they're about, because for them, oil coming out of Nigeria is more important than the people of Nigeria. But the good news we have here is that people can now speak up. They can tell their own stories through the social media platforms that have helped in galvanizing public opinion internationally and locally. And then we now have a solid diaspora, too, that has become part of this struggle in a way that has never happened before in Nigeria.
Adaronke Ige, could you say, we just have a couple of minutes, what exactly are protesters calling for now?
Beginning, it was about end SARS at first because of the brutality, because of what we saw as the indiscipline, the way that citizens, ordinary citizens, especially young people, were treated as common criminals just by profiling them and stereotyping and so on. However, it went beyond. It became a thing of, these things have been pent up over the years of indiscipline, lack of accountability, impunity on the part of government officials. So it became a thing of, it reformed the entire police. Their modus operandi is not suitable. They are killing people. At the same time, the nonchalant attitude of government, especially the federal government, the criminal silence when you need their voice to be loudest. They are totally silent, aloof in a criminal manner. People die under your watch. There's no accountability for anything. Even officers that are named, nothing happens to them. There's no prosecution. No justice is being seen as being done, manifestly done. So people were tired. It became a whole lot of issues. Now, what the demands were initially, we were asking for protesters that were, even in the course of the protest, as we were protesting against brutality, people were still brutalized, arrested, and so on. And we said, okay, release these people already. Then every named victim of police injustice, of systemic injustice, we want them to be duly compensated. We want them to get justice just by bringing people to book and then getting appropriate sanctions. We wanted that. Then we want to manifestly see that government is taking action on every other issue, topical issue that we have raised, and we have said we want this to be done and that to be done. For instance, we will tell you here that there's a commission that is called the National Human Rights Commission. This commission normally is supposed to oversee all human rights issues, abuses and just violations and so on. But let me tell you, even as we speak, that commission seems to be a toothless bulldog because there's no governing council. And without a governing council, what can they do? There has not been a governing council since 2015. Those are some of the issues. But then, so it became a thing of, even the end SARS that we were calling for, that became the hashtag for all these other holistic demands, the government was playing politics with it. So that's the reason you would see, okay, they came and said the IGP, still as we speak, General Muhammadu Buhari has been criminally silent. So let's even leave him aside.
Could these protests bring down the government of Muhammadu Buhari?
Look, anything can happen at this point, because everybody is speaking with one voice. And that's the reason that when they try to politicize this and say, oh, it's this group, is that opposition? No, we can't all be opposition at the same time. We are calling you out on certain things that you are not doing, on the fact that the system is running on injustice, and you are choosing to politicize it. So even at the point that they said they were disbanding SARS, we said this, it means these people are not listening. They don't get the point. We are not doing a christening ceremony. You can't disband SARS and then immediately replace it with SWAT, because SWAT is going to eventually become a worse form of SARS. So they are not listening, and that is the anger of an average Nigerian. So yes, you are correct. This can totally unseat the government, and this can totally lead to that reform that we have been asking for, to that social revolution, intellectual revolution, even political resolution. Because right now, what is worse is that instead of listening to the people and engaging appropriately, you are suppressing the people, you are oppressing the people further. And for how long can you do that?
Aderonke Ige, we want to thank you so much for being with us. We are certainly going to continue to cover this. Please be safe. Human rights activist and lawyer now in the streets of Lagos, Nigeria, where security forces gunned down at least a dozen people in the last few days. And Omoyele Sowore, Nigerian journalist, human rights activist, ran for president, was imprisoned by the current Nigerian regime, speaking to us from the capital. For folks who want to see more of our coverage of Nigeria, you can go to our documentary, Drilling and Killing: Chevron and Nigeria's Oil Dictatorship. Democracy Now! Went to Nigeria. I covered the Niger Delta with Jeremy Scahill, and we went with Sowore Omoyele to the Niger Delta, where we were investigating the activities of an earlier SARS called, as he said, the kill and go. That's the kill and go. When we come back, as fighting continues in the South Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we look at the conflict, which has already taken the lives of over 700 people. Stay with us.
Please raise your child today the way that you were born to play, way that we all disappeared, allowing us to shed our fears, pain. Your every step, when you fold enough to wanna die, when you cry, you will find. Falling stars drain every night. Falling stars drain. Please raise your child today the way that you were told to play, way that we all disappeared, allowing us to shed our fears, pain. Your every step, when you fold enough to wanna die, when you cry, you will find.
Falling Stars by Serge Tankian. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh as we turn now to the ongoing fighting between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, where hundreds of soldiers, dozens of civilians have been killed since the conflict erupted on September 27th. The violence has continued despite 2 attempts at a ceasefire brokered by Russia. On Wednesday, the Armenian prime minister said a diplomatic solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is no longer possible.
We should realize that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, at least in this stage, and starting from this stage, for a long time has no diplomatic solution. We should fight as long as it will be possible to find an acceptable diplomatic solution.
The Azerbaijani president, that's Ilham Aliyev, said Tuesday his troops had made territorial gains in the region, that Azerbaijan would regain Nagorno-Karabakh using force. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will meet with the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia on Friday. Nagorno-Karabakh lies inside Azerbaijan, but is controlled by ethnic Armenians. It was the site of a bloody conflict in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. This latest spike in conflict is the worst since the 90s, with new advanced weaponry. There are reports Azerbaijan is using combat drones purchased from Turkey and Israel. Amnesty International also reports Azerbaijan has used banned cluster bombs in civilian areas. Some fear a regional war is imminent, with Turkey openly supporting Azerbaijan, while Russia has a mutual defense pact with Armenia. Turkish-backed Syrian mercenaries are also reportedly fighting in the region. For more, we're joined by two guests. In California, Stefan Asturian is the director of the Armenian Studies program at University of California, Berkeley, professor of the politics and history of the Caucasus and Armenia. His forthcoming book is titled At the Crossroads of the Armenian-Azerbaijani Conflict, History, Territory, and Nationalisms. And in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, we're joined by Rubina Mogosyan. She is a writer, a photojournalist with the nonprofit news outlet EVN News, EVN Report, where she has been reporting from Nagorno-Karabakh. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! I want to start with the professor. To get context here, explain what was the trigger for this latest conflict, and explain the history of Armenia and Azerbaijan and how this has ignited at this point.
The origin of this problem goes back to 1921. This was the period when the former independent republics of Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan had been Sovietized, and Karabakh was inhabited by more than 90% Armenians. The Caucasian Bureau of the Communist Party decided to attach Karabakh to Armenia, and then on the night of the 4th to the 5th of July, that is almost the same day, Stalin came and changed that decision for political reasons. They were collaborating with the Kemalist Turks at that time. So this is the key moment. Now, why the conflict now? For a number of reasons, I believe. Azerbaijan probably thinks that it has reached the apex of its comparative advantage in relation to Armenia. It has bought more than $10 billion in armaments since 2014. It has problems with oil prices and reserves. There is social crisis, so diverting the attention is a good thing. But first and foremost, the negotiations are at a deadlock. President Aliyev, is not even accepting a referendum for Karabakh. He basically wants Karabakh itself, not the surrounding regions, to return to Azerbaijan. He made that statement just yesterday night, actually. I checked the sites, Azerbaijani sites. As for the Armenian prime minister, he came to power in 2018 and inherited a negotiation process, was accused of selling out Karabakh. And then he found out that actually his predecessors had agreed essentially to what looks like a step-by-step process whereby they are going to return 5 regions, then Azerbaijanis are going to open the borders. 2 other regions will be discussed, probably one very narrow internationalized, linking Karabakh to Armenia. And then there would be a referendum of Karabakh people at an undetermined moment to decide what they want. Well, President Aliyev has just rejected that in the past and just yesterday. And as a result, Mr. Pashinyan has asked for a change of that negotiation position. So we have essentially 2 totally divergent views of the negotiations. And then there is the Turkish factor that has pushed this war forward, encouraged it, and is leading it, actually. Turkey wants to have a foothold in the South Caucasus, to have a say there. And this is a key element in the timing of this conflict.
And Rubina Margosian, you, of course, have been reporting from the region in Nagorno-Karabakh. Can you explain what the situation is there and also elaborate on what Professor Asturian said about Turkey's involvement? The Armenian president just telling the Financial Times that Turkey is creating another Syria in the Caucasus.
Yes, a little bit about the situation. I went to Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, on the first day when the fighting started. That's the 27th of September. And, you know, if there's a conflict zone, this is one. You enter into the capital, Stepanakert, and the lights are off. The city is in complete darkness, and everyone is in bunkers and shelters. Even though at first we didn't hear the bombs or the shelling or the artillery at work, but we stayed there long enough to experience all of that. And we often hear this so-called or Armenia's accusation or Armenia says that cluster bombs are being used and drones are flying over Stepanakert. That we have experienced that over and over again every day when we were in Stepanakert. Infrastructure has been hit. The city is without electricity right now. The communications were hit the first day. So there was a problem with the internet and communication. The city doesn't have gas. And I'm not talking about, it's not only Stepanakert. The major cities in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh are in the same situation. So this has been the case since the 27th. So we have been reporting about this. We've been, we've been on the ground. However, now here I ask the question as to why hasn't anyone been responding to this? Why is it only journalists that are there, and our voices, as you may well know, often not very audible or we might be considered as a side of the conflict. Why aren't there other observers and fact-finding missions in Artsakh to also report on the human crisis that's happening there? And I also kind of want to talk about that when we're talking about the conflict and we're talking about the negotiations and the history, we are often forgetting that there are 150,000 people living there currently. We're forgetting that we're talking about the fate of these people, and these are people who've been there for generations. These are not new settlers. These are the owners of the land. So that's a bit about the situation in ground. I talked about the infrastructure, but the targeting of cultural heritage site in Shushi twice in one day, and second time when there were journalists there, international journalists, Russian journalists were hurt. Targeting of journalists. We came to a point where we decided to take off the sign that says press from our car because the Azerbaijani communication was that when journalists go to Artsakh, they never use Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, that's basically Azerbaijan, and they do not have permission from us to be there. Therefore, they're fair targets. So far, journalists have been injured, local journalists, French journalists, Russian journalists. So this is what's happening. And on this, and the reporting is not equal from the other sides. A lot of journalists, even internationals, the few that have been allowed there, have not had the freedom to report as we have. I've seen, to be more precise, hospitals, civilian hospitals, cultural sites, schools, buildings, cities being bombed, infrastructure being bombed, and that's been going on since the 27th.
Professor Asturian, could you say a little bit more explicitly about Turkey's involvement in the conflict? Of course, that there have been reports of Syrian mercenaries, Turkey bringing in Syrian mercenaries to fight alongside Azerbaijan. But there have also been reports of Turkish officers and special forces being directly involved in the conflict. Do you know of these reports? Is there confirmation of these reports? And if true, what are the implications of Turkish special forces being directly involved on the side of Azerbaijan?
Very precise information, including locations, numbers, level of participation, and so on, was leaked to the established, reputable newspaper, Russian newspaper Kommersant. It is clear that this is coming from the intelligence services of Russia. It is estimated that there are 600 approximately military personnel, Turkish military personnel, at the level of a battalion tactical group, 200, instructors 50, military advisors 90 in Baku, 120 flight personnel at the Gabala air base, 20 drones operators, and so on. I don't want to lose too much time, but it's very clear. And the whole operation was devised by the chief of staff of the land troops in Turkey and Mr. General Ümit Dündar and the Minister of Defense, Hulusi Akar. So Turkey's participation is no secret at all. It's not a mysterious issue. And they have been bringing in essentially Islamist terrorists, formerly known as moderates in some circles. As early as September the 28th, about 1,500 of them were brought in, and then more batches of these people. The groups included Faylak Ash-Sham, Sultan Murad Brigade, Furkat Hamza, Furkat Suleiman Shah, Jaish al-Sham, and a few others, including now people being brought from Libya. The key organizer of these is a private military contractor, Turkish private military contractor, called Sadat. The center for their activity is Afrin, and from Afrin they are transported to Şanlıurfa, formerly known as Urfa.
Professor Margosian, we're just about out of time, but I want to make sure that we get to the level of arms sales, tens of millions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars that Azerbaijan has bought weapons in the last 10 years. Where is it getting it from, and the level of support from Turkey? And finally, in Washington, the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia will meet with Pompeo on Friday, tomorrow. Can you talk about what you want to see come out of this and the significance of Nagorno-Karabakh as a petrol-rich region?
Yes, I will address that very concisely. The arms were bought mainly from Russia and Israel, about 4 billion or more from each. Then Turkey, then a number of smaller states, for example, Czechia, Ukraine, Belarus. These are the sources. But the main ones are Israel, Russia, and then Turkey. The amount of money spent exceeds $10 billion. That is absolutely established. It might be a little bit more, I don't know. Regarding the meeting on Friday with Secretary Pompeo, he is already on record as saying that the agenda will be de-escalation and return to the negotiation table. This is all fine, of course. The only issue that is left aside is how come a NATO member, Turkey, is involved in a war in which, of course, on the other side, there is Russia. And nobody is talking about that. There is a kind of free electron doing whatever it wants, and nobody is discussing that issue. The stakes are quite important because, for example, just yesterday, Azerbaijani troops have shelled Iranian villages on the other side of the border in Iran. Iran has already warned that it won't tolerate these type of things.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but we will continue to follow this conflict. Professor Stefan Asturian, University of California, Berkeley, and thank you so much to Rabina Margosian of the evnreport.com, where she's been recording from Nagorno-Karabakh. Again, happy birthday to Rabbi Karen. Wear a mask and vote. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.